Hello, welcome to Hill Talks podcast, Momentum in Midlife. I'm excited for you to meet only the third male I've had as a guest on Hill Talks, Aneace Haddad. He is fascinating. We are going to be talking about the similarities and differences of women and men in midlife. We're going to talk about what happens when we're embracing change, how he redefines leadership because he works with C-suite executives, and a journey of authentic self-discovery that he himself has experienced living in many countries around the world. And he's also going to talk about how he got here. So a big welcome to you, Aneace.
Thank you, Hillary. Great to meet you. Great to see you again. I have to say, I'm quite a third male on your podcast. It is a bit intimidating. I really hope that I have I really hope I have something to share that people find interesting. So thank you for having me.
You made it through the screening, Aneace, so you are worthy. Well, I'm excited that you're here, and it was a little intimidating. We certainly worked over the time change. You're in Singapore, I'm in Colorado, and we made it work. And we had a delightful conversation a few weeks ago, and I couldn't wait to dive back in. You are a seasoned C-suite coach, executive coach, but you started somewhere else. Tell us a little bit about how you got to this point.
Yeah, okay. I started the first half of my career, I was a techie. I was a programmer years ago, became a tech entrepreneur. So I began in Colorado, actually, in Boulder. And that's where I kind of grew up. And my daughters were born in Colorado. I went to CU, and then I started working in Colorado and as a programmer, and then quickly became involved in international business and still in tech. I'd grown up overseas, already spoke French fluently at that time. So as an adult, I spent 20 years in France, built a tech company in France, grew it to 30 countries, sold it in 2007 when I was 47, just before the global financial crisis. I had a big team in Singapore at the time, so I was already spending a lot of time in Singapore. I was moving here. I moved here in 2006. And in that process, I thought I was going to be a serial entrepreneur because I thought that was the only thing I could do. And I discovered that what I was most proud of was my people. And it surprised me. I had patents that I'd filed. I had won patent infringement lawsuits against competitors. So very hard driven, kind of a type A CEO. And I discovered that what I really loved most was people that worked for me that went off to become CEOs, CTOs, CFOs of other companies. And I found that was what gave me the most pride. So that kind of really jumbled up my life. And by the time I was 50, I'd become an executive coach. So the second half of my career now, for the last 14 years, has been in that space.
Fantastic. I love hearing about people's journeys and growth. And one of the messages we often talk about on our show is how important it is to know that you can pivot, you can reinvent yourself, you can do something completely different. And I find that all of the skills we've been building along the way kind of come together in a full circle moment of all of these skills you developed over all these years. And now here you are.
Yeah, that's looking back, 2020 hindsight, you can kind of see it in that way. And there's a lot of positive stuff. And then as you would know, as you're going through it, though, it's a storm. It's really, really hard. So that's a lot of what I've written about was that transition. And what is it that gets in our way at midlife when we're transitioning? The things we're holding on to in the past that
Yes.
we're having trouble letting go of, and we know we need to let go of them intellectually. We kind of get it, and then we stick onto it. So it takes a while to work through that, and that's a fascinating area.
I do love that. Well, let's slide into you work with both men and women. And is there something, what do you find are the similarities coaching executives in both men and women as they're transitioning through midlife?
Hmm. So again, the midlife angle, the midlife lens has become much clearer to me over the last year or so, where I've got in a more structured manner. I didn't think in that way a couple of years ago. It was simply coaching C-suite top teams. Now it turned out they were all at midlife. So the similarity. So in my upcoming book, I talk about three winds of change at midlife in terms of the impact on leadership. So I'm not looking, my lens is quite narrow on the impact on leadership with midlife. So the first wind of change is physiological. Our bodies are changing, um, health issues are coming up, hormonal changes, all of this is happening. And there are a lot of similarities and there are some differences, as you and I were speaking earlier. Um, I think they're mainly similarities at that level. The differences are well, every single person has differences in that physiological realm. Um, I think some of the main differences, if we were going to look at them by gender, is that women, the hormonal changes happen faster and deeper, and they know what's going on. You can see it, they can feel it. Men, it's more gradual. The testosterone lowering is a more gradual process. Stamina wise, I think men get hit harder. The biggest difference I can see is that women already know that their bodies change. They're familiar with their bodies more than men are, generally. So women go, okay, I'm going through menopause. It's coming. Here's what's happening. And they go see the doctor. Men go, what the hell is going on? I I don't have the stamina I used to have. I don't have the willpower. There's something wrong with me. I'm getting lazy. It goes to a very different direction because they're just not, it reminds them of sometimes of adolescence, but it's so far back, it's harder to deal with. Um, Second wind of change is neurological.
Well, can I interrupt you
And
just a second to talk about
yeah,
I would say that many of us as women, because the research shows us that most women struggle 1 to 5 years before really figuring out that they're in the perimenopause phase, which can last 5 to 15 years for us. And so a lot of us feel like we're losing our minds. We're not sure what's happening with our bodies because there hasn't been enough talk until the last few years. The podcast episode that just dropped in February, when you and I are talking, is about perimenopause and all the symptoms that women are not aware of. So I want to like respectfully disagree that
yeah,
sometimes women are more certainly in tune than men with their bodies.
yeah,
However, some of this stuff is so disruptive. We
yeah,
kind of it takes a few years of detective work to really get it figured out.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I get it completely. And that's what I was struggling with when I was thinking about what we would talk about today, because the differences that I see are so subtle
Mm.
that I'm not sure they really count as as real differences. There
Mm.
are some differences between men and women, but I'm really struggling to find them in terms of their impact on leadership.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm struggling with that question.
I liked what you said though, and this was probably before we pressed record, because you were talking about when men hit their midlife, that there are some specific things that the typical male, I mean, sometimes we think about, okay, they're going to have an affair, walk out on their wife, buy a sports
Yeah.
car, convertible, or motorcycle, quit their job and move someplace. But what would you say you see men typically going through at the executive level?
And so that's where structuring it in these three wins helps me to think a bit more clearly on that question, because it's a vast question. So physiologically, as the first wind, it's what we've been talking about. um, neurologically, where the brains are rewiring, where men and women experience the prefrontal cortex is our memory is we don't have our memory isn't as sharp as it used to be. We don't think as fast as we used to think, and that's impacting both men and women at the same time. Um, at the same time, our hemispheres, the two brain hemispheres, are connecting more, so we're able to see patterns more easily, connect the dots. There's a change in empathy. Our cognitive empathy starts to decrease, which means that understanding someone else's point of view becomes a little bit harder, but our emotional empathy increases. So we start entering an area where we may experience moments like, I really don't understand what you're saying, but I get you. I understand. Emotionally, I can connect. That starts to build up. And that's where there are some differences, I think, between men and women. I think I've seen women feel like liberated to get to that point, like we were talking just before we started, to get to that point. Female executives are often very hard driven, and they need to turn on a lot of masculine energy to get there. And the women that I've coached, and again, it's a tiny lens, so I'm not making some kind of general statement.
That's
The
right.
women I've coached, they arrive at a point where it's almost liberating. That's, oh, wow, I can tap into my emotions. It's okay. There's something changing that let me go into that. Men are like, oh my God, I can't go there. It's just not right for an executive to go there. So in that wind, I can see a bit more difference between men and women. Some of the most fascinating women, senior executive women I've coached are Indian. And I think for your listeners, I need to give a little bit of context for this. So most of my work is large multinational organizations. So these are people that work in multicultural worlds. And in India, to get to a high level to get anywhere in India, you have to have done better than a very large number of people because there's so many people. So to get up to the very senior levels, there's a great deal of brilliance and effectiveness that gets there. And then all of a sudden, to be able to tap into emotions and things that were put aside can really be extraordinary. There was a lady that I was coaching that influenced a lot of my thinking on some of these changes at midlife. This was around 10 years ago. CFO of a telco, of a mobile phone company, and she was brilliant. The board loved her. She was very effective, but the turnover rate in her team had increased and it was growing too much. So she was losing people. And she decided that she wanted to work on her empathy. And then she said, I want to work first. I want to start at home with my daughter. So her daughter was 16, I think, at the time, or 17 at the time, was on antidepressant medication. So she was struggling, an only child. The mother, the lady that I was coaching, was very busy at work. Her husband also had a big job and was traveling a lot. And so she said, I want to start at home and figure out where she was tapping into this intuitive feeling that what was happening at home was kind of happening at work. And so we came up with a plan to get feedback from her daughter, the same way as getting feedback from colleagues. And on the next call, she says, I asked my daughter for feedback, and she said, you're my mom. I can't rate you as a mother, but if you asked me to rate you as a cook, I'd give you a 0. And So she laughed like that. And she also got a little bit upset. It's like, why do I have to follow stereotypes and things like that? And I thought I'd raised my girl differently. How come she's demanding that? But then she figured out that maybe there was something about connecting over food. So every coaching session we had, she would talk to me about cooking with her daughter.
Oh,
And it became a bonding thing for them. So it transformed the relationship. Um, every week, every couple of weeks when we'd have our call, that's what she would start talking about is the cooking that she did with her daughter, the talking around the kitchen. Um, and then the empathy went up at work because it was just the ability to open up and be vulnerable, given permission to open up and be vulnerable,
yes.
asking a question like that.
Absolutely, right? Because we have a whole generation of people who have been taught to work hard, perform at the highest level, don't ask questions, don't express your feelings, don't show weakness. And now we're all learning that we've got to reprogram that because it's actually not serving our bodies and our minds and our spirits as we continue in life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that example. And
I have a
I'm so glad you shared that example of the power of connection through food and conversation. Because when we nourish our bodies physically, and then we are also nourishing our family, and we're cultivating those connections and relationships, which then feeds her career and the empathy at work. So that was brilliant.
and now looking back, and especially with the conversation we're having, I I have often I have often wondered how to say this. It may have been easier for the lady that I was coaching to tap into that vulnerability with a male coach. That it almost like giving just giving permission and the body language, facial expressions, and all that kind of thing, I think might have opened up that process. Um, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely, um, especially for in the Indian culture. We talk about international, multicultural. When I did my mission work service with Rotary International in India, I noticed a stark difference for how women are treated
yeah,
versus how men are treated, and even at the executive level, even medical doctors. And I was very sensitive to that because in
yeah,
America, we've worked kind of hard to raise our daughters up to speak up for yourself and you can do anything. However, I think, well, I'll finish the thought on it is excellent that as a man, you could give her that permission, that holding that space for her to speak up for herself, to get in touch with that energy and it in the emotion and the empathy and that not being weakness. I think that's
yeah,
beautiful, right? And men and women need to be able to have conversations with each other that men feel safe showing emotion, women feel safe showing emotion, and knowing that we're
yeah,
not criticized um, or made to feel shameful about it, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I think this new area of really focusing on midlife as a very distinct phase of development, of adult development. I think looking at kind of the 30s, where putting your nose to the grindstone, really cranking it out, put your emotions away, just make things work. I think that works in that environment and gets lots of stuff done and really moves companies forward. Expecting that same energy throughout, I think that's where the problem comes in. Or expecting when we're at midlife to want to continue doing that when our bodies and minds are just not there anymore and they don't want to do that. And there's other stuff blossoming, but we're ignoring that blossoming stuff because we're trying to stay the way we were. And I think that's where things really fall apart.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at we talk about the storms of midlife, And depending on the age of the children, for us, a lot of the times we are over 20 years of marriage. The children are maybe graduating high school, going to university, or they're full grown adults. And then these hormonal changes are coming, and then identity shifts are coming. The
Yeah.
scales veil are lifted from our face, from our eyes, and we can see with perspective of, wow, why was I
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to unpack. I'm so excited. So much to unpack in what you just said, because you described the third wind of change in my book. It's parental, with our kids growing up exactly what you described. And in that area, I also see some subtle differences between men and women. Well, okay. The similarity is that I discovered years ago how I've noticed since years ago how um, the parenting stage that we're at is kind of the leadership stage that we bring to work. So
Ooh,
KPI
hold on.
driven
Let's
leadership,
say that again. The parental stage we're at.
it corresponds more or less to the leadership stage or management stage that we're at. So with younger kids at home, there's a lot more of a KPI driven leadership style. You do this, you get that. You don't do this, here's what's going to happen. Um, when the kids grow up and start to leave home, we realize with more or less difficulty that we can't relate to them in the same manner anymore. If we want to have an influence on them, we need to be inspiring, empowering, stuff like that. It's not through the KPI kind of things when they were younger, which is why board members who have kids who tend to be adults and already gone have a very different attitude than senior executives whose kids are still at home and teenagers. So that shift I've seen over and over again. Usually when I bring it out, people go, "Oh my God, I'm I'm treating my people as children." And that's why when you Google, why does my boss teach and treat me as a child? There are tons of things on that.
Interesting. Now, I just want to let people know what KPI is, because not everyone listening will know that kind of abbreviation. Can you tell me just what that is a bit?
Yeah. KPIs are key performance indicators. They're kind of rough ways of measuring if somebody is doing their work. Um, there are different words for it. So yeah, we use way too many acronyms. I usually avoid them. That one tends to come back in my speech a bit more often than it should.
Well, I love it. And I love that you explained it, because we are talking about key performance indicators, and whether it's parenting, executive skills, our own midlife experience, we are all kind of judging our own performance, whether it's at work or at home or in our relationships,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So that when I see companies, I can hear when I hear the way that the performance indicators are managed in a company, I have a pretty strong sense that there are a lot of kids still at home. You can just kind of feel it. Um, and then at the micro level with individuals in the C-suite, you can see that impact. And there I see a much bigger difference between men and women than with the other wins. It's like women's, well, I'm generalizing, so there are exceptions to this, and people listening will go, "That's not me." Um, some of the generalizations I've seen is women, the teenage years are really, really hard. When the kids are becoming teenagers and they're kind of unbonding with the mother, bonding more with the father and outer stuff and all that kind of thing, it's hard in the teenage years. With men, that I've seen in senior levels, it tends to be as the kids are growing up and leaving home. Women are like, "Oh, good, they're leaving now." Now I can really focus on my career. Men are going, "Oh my God, all those years I missed because I was working so often." So guilt starts to touch in that
Oh,
space.
Oh, I've not heard
So
that
it's a very
perspective.
different,
That was eye-opening for
I've
me.
seen a very
And
big,
certainly I understand the, oh, look at all the years I missed, and oh, I was busy working, and uh yeah, kind of a change in, oh, that's already done. I blinked and 18 or 20 years went by.
yep, yeah, yeah. I think women struggle with that when the kids are a little bit younger. So by the time that happens, I don't see the same thing. And again, this is C-suite people. It's not generalization across all people.
Well, even as a professional occupational therapist, I can totally support that. When I was pregnant with my daughter 23 years ago, and I was training my replacement before I gave birth, and it wasn't going very well. And one of my supervisors came to me to say, I think you need to back off a little bit. And I was in my nesting phase, and I was taking care of everything and being the mom. And I was doing that to this young professional. And I came back to apologize, certainly, once I was made aware of it. But very different than having teenagers, it changed my dynamics with interacting with others of, well, I'd like to put this limit on you, but I need to respect that you need to figure things out on
Yeah,
your own. And then now that I have 20 and 23-year-old children, of, okay, you let me know when you need me. I might have some
yep,
boundaries on my time, but I want to be
yep,
there for you. So it's kind of that transition. I love that you brought that up.
yep, yep, yep. And I've seen that over and over again. The first time I saw it was in Europe with the CEO of a mining company. And I had coached a lot of many members of his team. Um, and there was a constant theme of being treated like children. And the CEO losing his temper, throwing tantrums, like a parent really angry. That's just, and when I remember really clearly one conversation with him, and he said, why do they act like little children? Why can't they act like teenagers? And that would already sounded weird to me, but it was because he had teenagers at home, and he was even comparing the people at work to even younger than teenagers. And then the conversation shifted to, yeah, but these are all adults and they've got kids of their own, and these are adults. You don't have any kids working for you. You don't have any child labor here. And then he shifted. It was most people shift instantly when they, just like you described, once you're made aware of it, you shift out of it. But it's so prevalent because it's such an important part of our identity, parenting, and it's such a huge and there are a lot of positive things that we bring into leadership from parenting, the 100% commitment, the care, all of these things we bring in, and they're very positive attributes. So it's not surprising we have a few of the negative attributes that come in with them too.
Exactly. And I know for me, I, the motherhood, it was very challenging for me, even though I really loved my children. They are both very brilliant and successful, which makes it very difficult to parent, by the way. When you have, highly intelligent children, they're going to challenge you on everything. So there's a fatigue factor. But then it was, wow, I've dedicated 20 years of my life to them. And then they're individuating, is the term we use, as they're finding their voices and their purpose and beliefs. And then I'm like, wait, do they need me anymore? And there was a transition time
Yeah,
of, they don't need me, they don't want me. And then later on, they were like, oh, hey, mom, could you do this for me? Or I need this.
yeah,
And there's this beautiful part on the other end of it of developing that relationship and being able to have conversations and kind of a mentorship
yeah,
model, or almost like a coaching model of, if you need me, I'm here, but I trust you to figure this out. My
yeah.
son might disagree, but he doesn't listen, so that's okay.
How old is he?
He's 20. He's
Your
20.
daughter's 23,
Yeah,
20.
23 and
You
20.
you just touched on something really that I find extremely beautiful, and it's a very difficult question. the sense of value that comes from being needed, and how to find value. So the question that comes up is, if they don't need me, what's my value? And I'm using they in the terms of both family as well as at work. If they don't need me, what value do I have? And then that can get into, with very senior executives, it can get into codependency issues that prevent them from really moving forward because they create an environment where they're needed because their sense of value comes from that. So that question, exploring that, if can I find my, I went through that. That was really difficult for me. What is my value if I'm not needed, if I'm not providing answers? It's a very, and then eventually I found that it's more presence and things like that in my case.
Mm.
But it's a really rich question at senior levels. Is can you find your value beyond or instead of being needed or having answers?
I love that you're connecting the parental wind in your book. And tell me the title of the book again, just so that I don't get it incorrect.
Soaring Beyond Midlife.
Soaring Beyond. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
I love that you and I are not
The
afraid.
subtitle is the,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. The
What's the
subtitle I saw on your website the same word. So the surprisingly natural emergence of leadership superpowers in life's second half. And I
Mm,
notice you're using the term superpowers as well at midlife.
absolutely. And apologies to the listeners with our delay, with our 15-hour time difference and many miles. But yes, midlife is a superpower, and it's knowing your identity once you've gone through the process. Very few people at 37, 40, and 45 are like, oh, yeah, I got it. But there's this beautiful thing that happens in our 50s and 60s that is the confidence, the experience, the wisdom, the not worrying about the things that do not need to be worried about.
Yeah.
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 We were touching on superpowers, and before we press record, you had asked me one question, because I do have on my website that I was diagnosed with ADHD, and at age 50. And that was coming as my children were graduating high school, which my daughter, by the way, graduated high school in Singapore. So Aneace, you and I have
Oh,
Colorado, Singapore connections for both of us. And the whole storm of not understanding why I couldn't remember what I was about to say or where I was in editing a podcast episode, and that along with it, and the kids wondering, why did you leave the stovetop on? Like, or why is this salad in the pantry instead of the refrigerator? And so late diagnosis ADHD can affect executives as well as anyone else. And it's the leading increase in diagnoses in midlife. And some of it's hormones.
that's amazing.
Executive function is kind of what we call it. And there's 12 key aspects: time management, task initiation. But did you have something? You had a really cool phrase that you were using. Could you share a little story about ADHD in your life?
Yeah, so I've not been diagnosed ADHD. I don't have any of the symptoms, but people very, very close to me have um, discovered as an adult that they have ADHD after discovering that their teenage kids had ADHD. And I like to go back to the same restaurants, same places. I'm a creature of habit. That gives me structure. I can travel the world. If I can just get back to the same hotels and stuff, I'm happy. And then you might recognize with ADHD, it's like really chasing after that shiny, new, different thing. So when I'm out with some of these people, rather than going back to the same place, it's like, okay, I'll suggest chasing dopamine by doing something new and different, taking a different route, going to a different place, and they love it. It just triggers dopamine for them.
It
So,
does.
and I've begun to notice it in people that I coach. Sometimes somebody will say something, do something, and then it'll remind me of somebody that I know. And I'll say, have you been tested for ADHD? And I say, oh, interesting that you asked that. So I'm surprised. I didn't know until you mentioned it that it was the fastest growing segment with adults being diagnosed.
It is, and more people around the world, because of all of our screen time and the frequent changes in and the stimulation. So our dopamine reserves in our brain, it's a neurotransmitter in our brain, and it's kind of the fun chemical, the new thing, the novelty. And for
Yeah,
those of us with
yeah,
ADHD, we are seeking that. And people
yeah,
with addiction, and whether it's gambling, eating, substance, any of overworking, it's looking for what that hit is going to fire your brain. So it's a
yeah.
fascinating conversation. And I was thankful that you asked that question. The
I was
dopamine.
curious one day for myself. I've done some of the tests online, but I'm still curious. So I tried one small tablet once of a friend of mine, and uh, really raised the dopamine that afternoon. I went for a run. We were at Singapore. I went for a run at McRitchie, 10-kilometer run. It was really great. I came back really pumped. And the next day, though, the down depression all day long was just horrible. So I know I don't have ADHD because it just had a completely different impact on me.
Wow, yes, exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, I've learned so much from you today, and I kind of wanted to review to make sure I haven't missed anything. Would that be okay?
Yeah,
Okay. So, really, what we've talked about is the differences and similarities in men and women going through this midlife adventure. You shared about your book that discusses the three wins that we kind of go through: physiological, neurological, and then even parental, which really taps into our identity and connects to our leadership style at the executive level. We've talked about the beauty of the age in midlife. We're in our 20s and 30s, nose to the grindstone, work, 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 earn that money. And that necessity of letting go and releasing kind of those expectations as our body changes, our mind changes, our capacity, but not necessarily in a bad way. It's just a change. And I
yeah,
loved that you talked about maybe we have decreased cognitive empathy, right? We might disagree more often with people, but our capacity for emotional empathy can increase. And I like the
yeah.
stories that you shared. So I think it's a great call to action for how are we going to connect with ourselves and have that perspective in our identity, whether it's as a parent, as an executive, and just as a human, in order to embrace this change. What else would you add?
Beautiful. That's also beautiful. Um, if there was anything to add, if there was anything to add, um, I think I'm drawn to that identity place. It's that at midlife we've we've shed so many identities already. Um, when our kids are little, our identity is parent of a toddler, and we hang out with other parents of toddlers. Um, at work, we've gone through different stages of identities. So by midlife, by 45, 50, we've taken on and shed a number of identities over our lives. So the notion of looking at all of these identities as temporary is becomes easier to understand at midlife. Whereas in our 30s, it's kind of fixed. This is my identity. This is who I am. This is my authentic self. In our 50s and stuff, we're starting to go, okay, it's a bit more jumbled than that. which actually brings me to a really big thing. It's some of the leadership models that came about 20 years ago and that are still extremely popular. Jim Collins, Good to Great. You've heard of level 5 leadership? He
Oh,
has 5 levels of leadership. And his 5th level of leadership is the highest level in his model. And it's a mix of humility and iron will. And he states that the companies that go from good to great are led by CEOs who have that unique mix of humility and iron will. And he's written that he's not sure if that's something that's possible to develop. And what I'm really questioning now is that when he did his work 20 years ago, the new average age of new CEOs was 45. Today, the average age of new CEOs of the S&P 500. Today, the average age of new CEOs is 55. And I'm wondering how much of the research that he did was on that younger mindset. Because so many executives that I coach, they have the iron will. That's what got them there. And as they come into midlife, everything you just described brings humility. It's hard not to be humble when you're going through all this stuff, especially when you've gotten so far through your iron will. And now you've got the humility coming in and merging those. So I think we're in a phase where these highest exceptional leadership qualities that have often been considered extremely rare or maybe even innate are achievable at midlife through this process that's happening. I think that's the only thing I would add.
well, I think that was very valuable because it is that great mix of humility with our iron will. And if we don't have self-control in our life, there are many things that are much more difficult. And if we don't have humility, relationships are really difficult.
Yeah.
And I was not very humble when I was younger. And I think about some of these tech startups and these very young people who are head of their companies, but they don't have that life experience and breadth. And so hopefully they are hiring people of various generations to bring in that wisdom. Is that what you found?
Oh yeah. I don't do much work with startups, even though I had a huge background in that area. But generally, the startups that I am aware of and interact with, they will bring in older people. And there are more and more startups that are being run by older people now. So it's yeah, that's you need that mix. You need those younger people for the energy and remembering where everything is, because you might forget where everything is. You need those younger people around, and at the same time, you need the older people. So it's kind of like, how do you find the right? You need people with ADHD. You need people on the spectrum. You need that diversity
That's
to
right.
avoid getting into groupthink.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up. And Aneace Haddad, I will put ways that people can connect with you on LinkedIn and Facebook in the comments and get information on your book. Give me the title again, please.
So the current book is Soaring Beyond Midlife. Soaring Beyond Midlife. The last one was a novel. The last one was a business novel on the same topic. This one is a more traditional leadership book. The surprisingly natural emergence of leadership superpowers in life's second half.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Aneace. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise, your perspective, how you embrace change, how you have redefined leadership for you and other executives, and the authenticity that you bring in your self-discovery, international, multicultural perspective and process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hillary. It's been a real pleasure, really fun. Thank you.